Hi everyone, I'm Anthony O'Flynn, and as the global events quicken, we're definitely now in a time where what I refer to as the convergence is accelerating. And by that I'm referring to the convergence of world events and this epic encounter of the light and the dark now going head to head at increasingly more visible levels. Obviously these two polarities, these two forces of nature have been present on this planet for forever, but now we're basically seeing the revealing of the globalist dark agenda, which is now becoming increasingly more apparent, and 2022 really marks the change of tact or change of direction from the perspective that now there is an attempt to add to the initial 2020 so-called pandemic with the control, the regulation, the tyranny, and now it's becoming increasingly obvious this is now being added to through the attempted control of the food supply and the climate hysteria and the woke green agenda, which is nothing but an ism, collectivism, stateism, communism, socialism, whatever label you want to give to it, packaged in a nice, neat, clean, user-friendly dialogue. But make no mistake, this is just tyranny rebranded in the age of digital marketing, in the age of spin, in the age of prolific indoctrination and mind control. And that's really where the conversation is heading rapidly in 2022, and the events are converging. And we can see that by the definite policies that are occurring in places like Holland, with a limiting of the amount of nitrogen that the farmers can use, and the closing of farms. And at the same time, there's a lot of rhetoric around the potential of a global famine due to a lack of food. I mean, if you haven't figured it out by now, if any government is attempting farmers to grow food, whether that's for export or domestic use, then that government is explicitly contributing to the possibility of a global famine. And now we're seeing the cold face of tyranny in the talking heads, the forced smiles, the polished, articulate, psychologically unwell politicians who are pushing forward this agenda around the world in the form of environmentalism, whereas the solutions that they're offering are actually adding to the initial problem that they claim to be solving in the first place. And we're seeing the blowback from some of these policies in countries like Sri Lanka, which at this point in time is basically a failed state. And the one post I did see on social media, which seemed to indicate even the the media had been taken over, or at least cancelled in the short term. I'm not clear on the details on that, but unless there is some counter move by the deployment of UN troops or something like that into Sri Lanka, then this will be a watershed moment from the point of view that there has been a loss of control and the people have taken over. We've seen the images of people storming the presidential palace, swimming in the pool, and even watching the reports of their activism on the TV inside the palace itself. So these events will intensify now with the quickening, and it's basically, how I see it, a last desperate attempt that this dark agenda has to try to wrestle control of more resources at a social, political, economic, environmental level, and at the same time the destruction of people's relationship to God as well. And ultimately that is the final outcome of this attempted agenda, is to actually make the inverted reality appear to be the light, for the inverted reality to appear to be this connection to divinity. And this is because these individuals who are promoting this dark agenda actually see the dark as their God. And as twisted as that may seem, it's actually the truth. And now we're starting to see that they are trying to normalise the inversion and trying to use it under the vehicle of political correctness, of diversity, of inclusion, in all the various social engineering that is going on, to normalise the darkness and to actually make the light, or what is good, what is pure, what is holy, what is divine, what is righteous, appear in some way conservative, or perhaps even right-wing, or immoral even. And as I've said before, and I've mentioned this in my book, it's because people are so disconnected from their own internal spiritual compass today that this can even be a possibility, because people now are so unsure about the difference between good and evil, between the light and the dark, that this normalized darkness, this normalized satanic behavior is being portrayed or painted as being the light. And this results in this total perversion of human morality, of ethics, of integrity, of philosophy, of everything that we take to be the founding pillars of what a truly good society is. And the indoctrination through the mainstream media, through the relentless propaganda that we see, means that people are basically having their centre inverted, and to go along with this. And very often we can see with some of the education in the schools and other philosophical doctrines that are being introduced, it's actually the parents that are the ones who actually have no moral compass, that they simply don't understand what they're a part of and what they're doing. So in spite of that, this upping the ante, if you want to call it, this acceleration of the agenda, is actually backfiring on the people and on the globalists, because particularly now that they've changed tact and introduced this kind of food, like you will eat the bugs and all this insanity, that it's only going to have the effect of producing more people questioning the official narrative, more people are questioning the agenda, and starting to see that this face of evil is a mask, and painted as to be something that is good for you, that will keep you safe. And this concept of safety, that you will be safe if you do what the government says. Look at history. Look at all the people that followed the government. Look at all the people that followed these dictators, these tyrants, these maniacs, and look how it ended for them. Why do you think it'd be any different today? Why do you think it would be any different in this current paradigm we're living in? And yet people still naively follow the sociopaths who are the politicians, who are not actually in control of a lot of things, but appear to be. And even here in Australia, we're still now starting to see this rhetoric ramping up to have the fourth dose of the magic potion. And remember the lies that we were told: after 2 doses, everything will go back to normal. If you just have 2, everything will go back to normal. And many people around the world try to warn about this, to tell people that this is not the end. You'll be having, additional doses, one after the other, and people just laughed and said, no, you only have to have 2. And then it was 3. And then after 3, everything will go back to normal. You can travel, you don't have to wear masks, you can go about your lives and get over this so-called pandemic. And guess what? Now up to number 4. And for those of you who haven't quite figured it out yet, what number comes after number 4? You do the math. So that's where we're going by following this totalitarian agenda. Loss of autonomy of your body, loss of sovereignty of your body, and basically going along and taking medication that is untrialed, untested, unproven, unnecessary. And as we all know, even Fauci's comments this week show that it is not stopping the transmission. So this is basically a revelation for some people, and for other people, it's something that's just completely obvious that this is just part of one aspect of this totalitarian attempt to hijack the free will of humanity. And so this convergence is happening in other areas as well. We've got the inflation. The official inflation in US is now at 9%. Many people are saying it's much higher than that. We've had increased interest rate hikes here in Australia, which has basically flattened the real estate market in just a matter of a few weeks, which shows just how tight people's budgets are and how reduced the purchasing power already is through people's incomes. And really we're entering a period now of what will be stagflation, and this will be irreversible in the short term, and this is by design. I mean, there was $100 billion given away in JobKeeper, and these high-level bankers around the world with all the welfare schemes that were made over and produced over the so-called pandemic, where do you think that money comes from? In a fractional reserve banking system, the money needs to be borrowed before it can be distributed. It is a debt-based system by design. And with this increased circulation, the expansion of the money supply, comes what? Comes inflation. Inflation is a regressive tax on the working class, and it is by design to reduce your purchasing power, to reduce the actual value of the currency you're being paid in or earn money in or have savings in. And the effect is lower standard of living, and again by design. And this is just another part of the agenda that's going forward. It's coming at the society at all levels now. As reported in the Glasgow Times, the International Energy Agency produced a plan to reduce emissions. And guess what? One of them was that people living in cities would not be able to drive their car on Sundays. And that's just one point of the plan. So what's happening now at a spiritual level is that this intensification, as I speak about in detail in my book, Paradigm Shift, The Global Awakening of Humanity, 2020 to 2040, this intensity of the darkness before it fades, as there's two tectonic plates and the light is coming over the dark, and with this change of consciousness comes this tension, this pressure, this inability for the dark to just dissipate at this point. But what we're seeing in my view now is a time pressure, not from the perspective of the light. The light, if you want to use it, that the goodness, what is pure, what is golden, what is elevated, what is of a high state of consciousness, cannot lose this transition. It is part of a cycle of nature. It's something that simply is a process at a galactic and cosmic level. So this cosmic game, with the dark appearing to have all the aces, appearing to have all the power, the control, it's something of an illusion. And the illusion, in my view, will not break properly until 2024, when Pluto enters Aquarius. This will be the beginning of this, and it won't change a little bit in 2023. Someone's starting to fire back there. And but Pluto goes into retrograde motion back into Capricorn there. So 2023 you'll start to see the seeds, but the seeds have already been planted and actually germinated. So we're starting to see this more, but it's really a matter of staying in your center and staying in this balanced state and amplifying your own light. That doesn't mean spiritual bypassing, checking out from what's occurring, avoiding yourself, your shadow, trying to bury your head in the sand. And unfortunately, as I see things, that so many people trying to bury their head in the sand, particularly with the economic impacts of what's occurring now, it's going to be very bitter, because economically we're entering a new cycle. And this is should have happened a long time ago, perhaps even the GFC properly here in Australia, but we avoided that through the mining boom, through the housing boom. But now it's inevitable. The cannot be kicked down the road any longer. We're seeing that with the radical housing stress we have here, mortgage stress, with interest rates, now just over 1%. Historically, depending on how you calculate it, interest rates in Australia have been between 7 and 9%, depending on the specific calculations. So when people who are really freaking out about a 0.5% interest rate rise, then if you look at historical charts, then there's nothing compared to what we potentially could have. And the argument will be, will the Reserve Bank at least attempt to curb inflation by rising interest rates, or will they sacrifice the dollar through keeping the interest rates relatively low? It's a moot point. At this point, it looks like they're going to actually sacrifice the dollar. And once that happens, that's going to be an economic meltdown that will be much bigger than mortgage defaults and mortgage crisis like you saw in Ireland in 2008 and also throughout Japan in the 90s. But Australians live in this little bubble, in this little illusionary world where they think that this can't happen here. And it's already happened here. It's just that most people haven't realised it yet. So it's going to be a very painful lesson in that point of view for people who have basically just lived way beyond their means. And it will be a period of the Australian soul maturing and growing up and starting to become more sovereign and moving into actually a high level of consciousness collectively. I'll be making another video about that soon. But really, in terms of the internal preparation, which is the key to this, is to amplify our light. It's always a solution to raise our level of consciousness, to do the inner work, to do the meditation, to do the yoga, to do the Tai Chi, to do the Vipassana meditation, to do the prayer, to do solid practices with a solid tradition that come from solid yogis, sages, mystics, realized beings, not this nonsense of the New Age, which is actually going to become deeply unstuck as we move through this process. That the New Age really will become scrutinized in a way that its practitioners and devotees and proponents actually perhaps haven't really had to deal with yet, because of this lack of depth, lack of validity of teachings, lack of depth, ultimately lack of wisdom, and not enough genuine processes to produce states of healing, of inner peace, of knowledge, of wisdom, of connecting to these higher states of consciousness, to embody the 5D reality, which is the work in progress that we all are, and that this will be something of a revelation itself in the awakening community or the subculture of the New Age community. So this is an extremely exciting time to be here in spite of all the adversity. I really have compassion for everyone for what they're going through and the different challenges people are having in their lives. It's not easy for anyone, but challenges that people are having might not be so visible. Some people's perhaps economic situation is very visible, or whatever the fallout of the so-called pandemic has produced for them, but for other people things are more internalized. So it's really a process of us going through this rite of passage. And that will be a key phrase that you'll hear from me, at least for the duration of this decade, that this is a rite of passage. And there will be a lot of tough love, there will be a lot of maturity, and there will be something of an inner strength developed in those that hear the calling to honour what is this global paradigm shift. So that's all from me for now. I'll be back with plenty more. The light's starting to fade out. Stay strong, stay centered, and remain in your true power, which is this connection to the essence of your being. Thanks for watching. We live in epic times.